Hello, welcome back to my channel. In May, Fox News reported that the Hendry School District in Florida is planning to transform unused district land into low-cost apartments for teachers. This is part of the district's plan to attract teachers as they face a shortage. One of the principals in the district reported that high rental costs in the area is one of the biggest reasons that potential teachers have refused employment. It's no surprise that many states have been facing a teacher shortage in the past few years. And a quick search reveals that the school district of Hendry is not the only school district planning to build affordable housing for their staffs. School districts in California, Colorado, Texas, Wyoming, and others have, in the past few years, began planning and construction of accommodation units specifically for teachers. Now, the issue behind these plans is very straightforward. Since the pandemic, cost of living has skyrocketed across North America, and teacher salaries have fallen relatively behind since 2016. What is worse is that schools are often built in city or suburb centers, and the nature of the work means that teachers face higher housing costs, which has become one of, if not the most, significant costs that limit their employment. Of course, the motivation behind these school districts trying to build housing for teachers is understandable. But I, like many others, wonder why not just pay them more? To begin with, not everyone is thrilled about the idea of living near coworkers long term. And this also means that parents and students will know the addresses and locations of their teachers after school hours. I can't imagine that most teachers will be excited over this idea. Beyond that, teacher housing brings in the complication of tying housing and employment contracts together, making it more difficult for teachers to exit their jobs. From the teacher's perspective, the real issue is that teacher salary is no longer competitive. It is not uncommon for some teachers to spend their own money for classroom supplies or spend an extra 2 to 3 hours before and after school every day to manage a workload. Yet, teacher salary not only falls behind those with similar education levels, but also falls behind the real purchasing power of teacher salary from even before the 2008 financial crisis. Facing these challenges, the most effective solution that teachers want is also very simple. The school district should pay the teachers more instead of trying so hard to build affordable housing. Knowing this then, why do school districts across many states still went ahead with plans to build staff housing? Let's take a look at how public schools are funded in America. Education funding comes from 3 levels of government: federal, state, and local. Public education in America began as local projects funded by local communities. Any increases to teacher salaries are generally funded through increases in property taxes. Beginning in the 1920s, however, America was spurred on by global conflicts, expanding industrialization, growing urbanization, rapid technological advancements, and it was during this period that organizational abilities as a nation grew as the federal government expanded in size and power. All of which meant that the government was incentivized to expand public education. So since the 1920s, federal and state governments began to provide funds to push for greater enrollment, more comprehensive education programs, and, most importantly, more equitable programs. State funding comes largely from individual and corporate income taxes and state sales taxes. But while the distribution and use of local funding is more straightforward, where the money goes straightly to local schools, state funding goes through a formula where certain school districts will receive more than others. Now, on average, states provide almost half of the funding for public schools. But if we take a closer look, we can find massive differences between school districts within a state. In the state of Colorado, for example, during the school year of 2023 to 2024, the school district of Boulder received less than 20% of its educational funding for each student from the state, while the school district of Aurora received almost 70% from the state. This is because revenue from property tax varies greatly across districts in America, and state funding considers resident wealth, property value, geographical location, special needs, and enrolls students to ensure that students across the state should receive similar levels of education. Together, state and local funding covers over 90% of public schools' finances. Similar to the state, the federal government didn't have the tradition of financing public education. But since the 1960s, the federal government gradually increased the support for education, and now federal funding hovers around the 8% mark. Most of these fundings, however, pays for the maintenance and operation cost of public schools, meaning that they mainly pay for teacher salaries, building maintenance, supplies, insurance, and utility costs. Beyond this, however, there's another source of funding available to school districts, and that is school bonds, which basically allows districts to borrow a one-time sum of money that is then repaid at the end of a typically 10 to 30 years period. Because bonds only provide a temporary source of funding, districts cannot, by law, use it to pay for maintenance and operation costs, including teacher salaries. But it can be used for one-time projects, such as building a new school, buying new equipment, or financing new renovations. Bonds allow for districts to spread the cost of expensive projects across time without affecting the district's normal educational operations. But, like any government bonds, it is subject to voters' approval, and while it sounds less significant than a permanent raise in property taxes, it is still money out of the voters' pockets. The way that bonds are repaid is through a temporary increase in property taxes, known as a debt service tax rate. But as the bond is slowly repaid, property taxes will decrease to its original position. This is exactly how some of the districts are planning to fund their teacher housing plans. But if we compare fundings from school bonds and from regular taxes from state and local level, we can see that there are a few reasons why districts may choose to build a teacher housing instead of simply raising salaries. The first reason is that a small amount of funding from school bonds can achieve a greater effect on teacher retention, though only for a smaller number of teachers. In 2022, for example, Palm Beach County in Florida voted to increase property taxes that would then be used to support all teacher wages. Over $200 million was expected to come from this tax, and at least half of that was to be used to increase teacher wages. Depending on the years of experience that you have, it offers teachers an extra $1,000 to $10,000 per year. With this funding, the average salary of teachers is just over $54,000, which, according to a living wages calculator made by MIT, is just above the living wages for a single adult with no kids or dependents. Now, let's look at building teacher housing plans. The school district of Roaring Fork in Colorado is building a 50-unit teacher housing complex for $29 million that was funded through bonds. And Jefferson Union School District in San Francisco just opened up a 122-unit teacher housing complex that cost $75 million, of which $33 million was provided through a bond, and the rest was borrowed through with a certification of participation that will then be repaid with income from rent. All these units will be rented to district staff at about $1,300 a month, which is almost half of the local average rent prices. If we convert that value into salaries, we're looking at about $12,000 raise for every teacher that it houses. As you can see, proposals to build teacher housing requires a lot less funding. Of course, school districts often employ thousands or tens of thousands of staffs, while these housing units can only benefit a fraction of those teachers. But this can at least ensure that a school district can retain some of the more in-demand staffs, such as for their special education programs or language programs. Beyond that, there's another benefit of using bonds. If we look at the traditional ways of increasing staff wages, every dollar that is raised from property tax hikes goes directly into salaries. But funding from bonds can be then used in further financing, where every bond dollar could generate up to $6.5 of financing. Beyond using bond dollars, school districts have become creative in the properties that they own. In the case of Hendry County, the school district made a deal with private developers where the district trades some of its unused properties for the developer to build teacher housing at a lower cost. Another example is Eagle County in Colorado, who reached out to community members and made deals where they were prioritized renting to district staffs. While some strategies towards providing affordable housing for teachers may be more costly than others, they ultimately extract from the overall resource and value of the community. Unfortunately, teacher salaries can only be provided by local property and state income taxes. Any proposal to raise those taxes are undoubtedly more complicated and challenging than simply providing a bond that only temporarily increases property taxes. Facing these challenges and a teacher shortage in certain areas, it is only understandable that some districts have gone the more creative route. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next video. Cheers.